Nobody in the church knew she was coming. That was the point. It was a Tuesday evening in November 1986, and the Jones Tabernacle Baptist Church on West Baltimore Street was holding its monthly community benefit night. The kind of event that small urban churches have been holding for as long as small urban churches have existed, which is to say, for a very long time. Which is to say that the people who came to these evenings came not because they expected anything extraordinary, but because they had been coming for years, and the coming itself had become the thing. The accumulated habit of a community showing up for itself in the specific, unglamorous way that communities sustain themselves. There would be food. There would be music. There would be the particular warmth of a room full of people who have known each other long enough to stop pretending. There would, the program said, be a piano performance by a local musician. The local musician was Kenny Moore. Kenneth L. Moore had grown up in Baltimore, had grown up specifically in the tradition of gospel music that ran through the black church community of Baltimore like a river runs through a landscape, shaping everything around it without calling attention to itself. He had started playing piano at 4 years old, listening to his mother and his aunt at the instrument, absorbing the music the way children absorb the things that surround them before they know they are learning. By the time he was 10, he had formed a gospel group with his 3 sisters, the Moore Singers they called themselves, and they had performed in churches across Baltimore and Washington in the specific, earnest way of children who have found the thing they are supposed to do and are simply doing it. By 1986, Kenny Moore was 35 years old and had been the musical director, the keyboard player, the background vocalist, and what Tina Turner herself called the ambassador of her band for 9 years. He had been with her since 1977. He had played on stages across 5 continents. He had been in the room for the private dancer sessions, and the Grammy wins, and the comeback tour, and the stadiums, and the arenas, and every configuration of the Tina Turner live experience that the 1980s had produced. He was, in the specific and irreplaceable way of someone who has been present for everything, essential. Not famous, not in the way that Tina was famous, not recognized on the street or mobbed at airports, but essential. The music could not be what it was without him at the keys. He had called her mother since the early years. She had never asked him to. It had simply arrived, the way the right words sometimes arrive, and she had accepted it the way you accept the things that are simply true. He was not her son. She had sons. But he was something that did not have a precise name. Something in the category of people who have been present for so much of your life that the distinction between chosen and given has stopped meaning anything. The benefit evening had been his idea. They were in Baltimore for 2 days between tour legs, the kind of brief administrative pause that touring schedules produce. Time that is technically rest but is not quite rest because the machinery of a tour does not fully stop even when the shows do. Kenny had grown up in this city. He knew the Jones Tabernacle. He had played there as a child, had sat in those pews, had absorbed the specific quality of music in that specific room, the way the sound moved in the old building, the way the congregation received it, the particular temperature of a gospel church on a weekday evening when the people who came were not dressed for Sunday, but for Tuesday, which was its own kind of dressed, its own kind of present. He had said, "I want to go play for them." Just that. Not a proposal, not a plan. A statement of want, the simple expression of someone who has been playing arenas and misses the feeling of a room where everybody knows everybody, and the music is not entertainment, but something older than entertainment. Tina had looked at him. She had been in the middle of something. She was always in the middle of something. And she had stopped being in the middle of it and looked at him and understood, with the specific speed of someone who has known a person for 9 years, exactly what he was asking. She had said, "I'll come." Kenny had looked at her. She had said, "They don't need to know. I'll just sit at the piano. You play. If the moment is right, it will be right." Kenny Moore had been playing piano since he was 4 years old. He had played with Duke Ellington's musicians and Aretha Franklin and Gladys Knight and Carly Simon and Bob Dylan. He had played on stages for 100,000 people. He had played in studios where the silence between takes cost more per minute than most people earned in a day. He had, in 31 years of playing, heard a great many things said about music and the moments music produces. He had not heard anything quite like that. They arrived at the Jones Tabernacle on a Tuesday evening in November without announcement. Kenny had called ahead, had spoken to the deacon who organized the benefit nights, and told him he would like to come and play, that he was in town for a couple of days and wanted to give something back to the church where he had started. The deacon had said yes with the specific, uncomplicated gratitude of someone who has been organizing community events for a long time and knows that a piano player who offers to come for free is not something you question. He had put it on the program: piano performance, local musician, Kenny Moore. He had not mentioned the other person. Kenny had asked him not to, had explained, briefly, that he might be bringing a friend who wanted to sit quietly and listen, that the friend preferred not to be announced, that they should simply let the evening proceed as it was going to proceed, and see what happened. The deacon was a man of 62 who had been running benefit nights at the Jones Tabernacle for 20 years, and had developed, over those 20 years, the particular wisdom of someone who has learned that the evenings which proceed unexpectedly are usually the ones worth remembering. He had said, "Whatever you need, Kenny." The church filled the way it always filled on benefit nights, not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily, the way water fills a vessel, the seats taking on their occupants one by one as people came in from the November Street and found their places and settled into the specific ease of a room they had been settling into for years. The congregation on a Tuesday benefit night was different from the Sunday congregation in the specific way that weekday church is different from Sunday church. More tired, more plain, less dressed, but perhaps more present. The performance of Sunday replaced by the simple fact of showing up on a Tuesday because showing up mattered. The older members arrived first. They always did. The women in their 60s and 70s and 80s who had been coming to the Jones Tabernacle since before the younger members of the congregation were born, who had their specific seats and their specific ways of arranging themselves in those seats, who carried in their bodies the accumulated decades of Sunday mornings and Tuesday evenings and every other occasion the church had given them to be together. They came in their weekday coats and set down their bags and exchanged the specific greetings of people who have been exchanging greetings in the same building for 30 years. Not the elaborate greetings of people who haven't seen each other, but the brief, warm, necessary acknowledgments of people who see each other constantly and for whom the greeting is not information but connection. They settled into their pews. At the back of the church, near the side door, two people had come in quietly. One of them was Kenny Moore. He was wearing a plain dark coat, nothing that announced him, nothing that said anything beyond a man arriving at a church on a Tuesday evening. The other person was wearing a scarf pulled up around her face against the November cold, a coat that was good but not extraordinary, the specific, practiced anonymity of someone who has spent years learning how to be in public without being seen. They had not been seen. Kenny walked to the piano. It was an upright, not the concert grands of the arenas, not the studio instruments he had spent his career behind, but a church piano, a working instrument that had absorbed decades of Sunday mornings and benefit Tuesdays and choir rehearsals and the specific, accumulated weight of music played in service of something larger than itself. He sat down at it and put his hands on the keys and felt, in the way that musicians feel the instrument before they play it, what kind of piano it was and what it wanted from him. It was a gospel piano. He began to play. He began with something quiet, not a performance, not an entrance, but an beginning, the way water begins to move before it becomes a current. The congregation settled into it, the way congregations settle into familiar music, the specific relaxation of people whose bodies have been conditioned by years of hearing this kind of music in this kind of room, to respond to it with a particular ease of something recognized. Nobody was looking at the woman who had taken a seat at the end of the piano bench. She had sat down so quietly, so without ceremony, that the settling of the congregation into Kenny's playing had simply absorbed her presence. She was a woman in a coat, sitting at the end of a piano bench in a church on a Tuesday evening, which described approximately nobody and therefore attracted no particular attention. The old women in the front pews were looking at Kenny. The younger members of the congregation were looking at the program. The deacon was standing at the back with his hands folded, watching the room the way deacons watch rooms on benefit nights, with the particular vigilance of someone responsible for the evening going well. The room did not know what it was sitting in. Kenny played for 10 minutes. He moved through the music the way he had always moved through music, not showing off, not performing in the arena sense, but playing in the church sense, which was different. Which was the sense he had started in at 4 years old, listening to his mother and his aunt. Which was the sense that had never left him, no matter how many arenas he had played or how many miles of tour bus had accumulated behind him. The gospel piano is not about the player. It is about the room. Kenny Moore had always known this. The room was warm now. The congregation had arrived at the specific temperature that rooms arrive at when the music has been doing its work for a while. Not the heat of excitement, not the arousal of anticipation, but the warmth of being gathered, of being held together in a space by something that asks nothing of you except that you be present. The old women in the front pews had their eyes closed. 2 of them were swaying slightly, the unconscious movement of bodies that have been receiving gospel music for 60 years and respond to it the way plants respond to light. And then Kenny changed. Not dramatically. A pianist changes keys the way a river changes direction, not suddenly but inevitably, the current finding the new path with the specific logic of water that knows where it is going. He moved into something that the congregation recognized and did not recognize at the same time. A melody that lived in the body before it lived in the mind, that arrived in the chest before it arrived in the ears, that was familiar in the way that things are familiar when they have been inside you for a long time without your knowing it. The woman at the end of the piano bench opened her mouth. She did not stand up. She did not make an announcement. She simply opened her mouth and the sound came out. The sound that had been in her since she was a child in Nutbush, Tennessee. The sound that had climbed above every arrangement it had ever been given. The sound that knew, always and without instruction, where the higher register was and how to find it, and what to do when it got there. The sound filled the Jones Tabernacle Baptist Church on West Baltimore Street on a Tuesday evening in November 1986. It took approximately 4 seconds for the congregation to understand what was happening. The first person to react was an 81-year-old woman named Dorothy in the second pew from the front. Dorothy had been coming to the Jones Tabernacle for 53 years. Dorothy had buried a husband here and baptized grandchildren here and sat in the second pew from the front for so many Sundays and Tuesdays that the specific worn surface of that pew had conformed, over 5 decades, to the specific shape of Dorothy. Dorothy was not a woman who was easily surprised. Dorothy's hands went up. Not in the slow, deliberate way of a planned gesture, in the involuntary way of a body that has received something it was not prepared for and has responded before the mind could intervene. Both hands, straight up, the specific gesture of someone who has been in church long enough to know what you do when the Spirit arrives, and it arrives before you're ready. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. She was looking at the woman at the end of the piano bench with the specific expression of someone who is seeing something they cannot immediately reconcile with the reality they believe they were in. The woman next to Dorothy saw Dorothy's hands go up. She looked where Dorothy was looking. Her hands went up. It moved through the front pews the way fire moves through dry grass, not slowly, not with warning, but with the specific speed of something that has found its conditions and is simply doing what it does. The old women of the Jones Tabernacle, the women who had been coming here for 40 and 50 and 60 years, the women who had heard gospel music in this room 10,000 times and thought they knew what a Tuesday benefit evening could produce. Their hands went up, one after another, in the chain reaction of people who are all seeing the same impossible thing at the same moment. Tina Turner was sitting at the end of the piano bench in their church. Tina Turner was singing in their church, not on a stage, not behind a barrier. Not in an arena where she was a figure of light and distance, a presence felt more than seen. The idea of Tina Turner rather than the person. She was here. She was in the second row's sightline. She was close enough that Dorothy could see her face, could see the specific concentration of someone singing something they have always sung, and are singing now with the particular fullness of someone who is not performing for a crowd, but giving something to a room. The sound was not what they had heard on the radio. It was larger than that. Not louder, larger. The radio gives you the recording of a voice. The room gives you the voice itself, the full dimensional fact of it, the way it moves in actual air, the way it enters the body through every surface at once rather than through the small speakers of a device. The old women of the Jones Tabernacle were receiving Tina Turner's voice the way the air in that room received it, completely, without intermediary, without the distance that stages and arenas and recordings impose between the sound and the person it reaches. The tears came without announcement, on the face of the woman behind Dorothy, and on Dorothy's own face, and on the face of the deacon at the back of the room who had stopped watching the evening go well, and was simply standing with his hands no longer folded, watching something he had not organized and could not have organized, and would spend the rest of his life describing to people who were not there. Kenny Moore played. He played the way he had always played for her, not behind her, not accompanying her in the sense of following, but with her, the specific musical conversation of two people who have been playing and singing together for 9 years and have developed, in that time, a language that is entirely their own. He knew where she was going before she went there. She knew what he was going to give her before he gave it. The piano and the voice moved through the music together, the way two people who have walked the same road for a long time walk it, without negotiation, without instruction, each one simply knowing. Tina Turner sang for 37 minutes. She sang gospel, and she sang the songs that had come from gospel, the songs that had roots in exactly this kind of room, in exactly this kind of Tuesday evening, in the specific tradition of black sacred music that had been the foundation of everything she had ever done on every stage she had ever stood on. She sang without a microphone. The Jones Tabernacle was not a large building, and her voice did not need amplification in a room of this size, had never needed it, had always been capable of filling whatever space it was given without assistance. The old women did not sit back down. They stood the way people stand when they cannot sit, when the body has received something that makes sitting an inadequate response, when the only appropriate physical expression of what is happening inside is to be upright, to be open, to be as fully present in the room as the moment demands. Their hands were up, or clasped, or pressed to their chests. Their faces were wet. They were making sounds, not the organized sounds of a choir, not the call and response of a Sunday service, but the spontaneous, unorchestrated sounds of people who are being moved past the point where sounds are chosen. At the end of the 37 minutes, Tina Turner stopped singing. She did not announce that she was stopping. The last note simply ended, the way notes end, and Kenny's piano came to rest beneath it, and the room held what had happened in it for a moment before anyone moved. Then Dorothy reached out and took Tina Turner's hand. She did not say anything. She was 81 years old, and she had been coming to the Jones Tabernacle for 53 years, and she had received, on a Tuesday evening in November, something that she had not known was possible to receive in this room. She held Tina Turner's hand the way you hold something that you are not yet ready to let go of, and Tina Turner held hers back. Kenny Moore sat at the piano and did not play. He sat with his hands in his lap in the specific stillness of someone who has just done the thing they came to do and has no desire to add anything to it. He had wanted to come back to the room where he had started. He had wanted to give something to the people in it. He had not entirely known, when he made the call to the deacon and arranged the Tuesday evening, what the giving would look like. Now he knew. Tina Turner never included this evening in her official biography. It did not appear in the press releases, or the tour histories, or the extensive documentation of a career that had been documented from its beginning. It belonged to the category of things she kept, the private inventory of moments that had confirmed, over a lifetime of performing, what the music was actually for. Kenny Moore died on March 25, 1997, in Sydney, Australia, while on tour. He was 45 years old. Tina Turner dedicated every performance of the Wildest Dreams tour to him after his death. She did not explain publicly what she was dedicating, not the full explanation, not the Tuesday evening in Baltimore, not the old women with their hands in the air. She simply dedicated the performances to him, night after night, in the specific private way of someone who is honoring something that does not require a public accounting. The deacon at the Jones Tabernacle retired in 2003. In the 20 years between that Tuesday evening and his retirement, he told the story of what happened in his church on a November night in 1986 to anyone who would listen. to new members of the congregation, and to visiting preachers, and to the grandchildren of the old women who had been there, the children who had grown up hearing the story from their grandmothers, and who had arrived at the church wanting to see the room where it had happened. Dorothy lived to 94. She never forgot the feeling of Tina Turner's hand in hers. She described it in the years that followed, the way you describe the things that have become part of the structure of who you are. Not as an event, not as a story with a beginning and an end, but as a fact of her experience, something that had entered her on a Tuesday evening and had never fully left. She said, "I knew what she was giving us." She said, "She didn't have to come. She came anyway." She said, "That's what the music is. Somebody who didn't have to show up, showing up." If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who deserves to hear it today. Subscribe for more stories about the human beings behind music's greatest legends. The Tuesday evenings, the small rooms, the moments that never made the headlines. And if Tina Turner's voice ever found something inside you that you had forgotten was there, tell us about it in the comments. Hit the notification bell so you never miss one of these stories.